June 1943. A continent away from the battlefields of Europe, deep inside the American interior, an event took place that the German leadership never anticipated. Not a battle, not a bombing raid, not a clash of armies, but a moment of industrial revelation, a realization that shattered the Third Reich's strategic confidence. The Nazis believed America was soft, chaotic, and inefficient. They believed the U.S. lacked discipline, lacked unity, and lacked the serious industrial backbone required to sustain a long war. Their propaganda ministers assured the German people the United States would collapse economically the moment the war intensified. They were wrong, catastrophically wrong. Before the war, Nazi planners viewed America through a distorted lens. Goebbels fed the German public a constant stream of dismissive propaganda. The Americans were decadent. The industrial might they bragged about was exaggerated, and their working class was too diverse, too divided, to compete with the unified, disciplined German worker. High-ranking German officers echoed the same arrogance. The Americans have machines but no spirit. Their factories are built by capitalists, not patriots. They will never sacrifice the comfort of peacetime for wartime production. Those beliefs were not simple mistakes. They were strategic assumptions deeply embedded in Nazi war planning. Hitler himself once declared America was nothing more than a country of businessmen without the will to fight. But what the Nazis didn't understand, what they couldn't understand, was that American capitalism and American democracy were engines of productivity unlike anything in Europe. And soon, undeniable proof would confront them. The early war years gave Germany confidence. The Blitzkrieg smashed across Europe faster than any army in modern history. France collapsed in 6 weeks. Britain fought alone. The Soviet Union was reeling under Operation Barbarossa. Germany dominated continental industry and controlled millions of laborers. Meanwhile, America looked slow to mobilize. In 1940, before Pearl Harbor, the U.S. Army ranked 18th in the world, smaller than Portugal's. German observers laughed, but beneath the surface, something enormous was awakening. Congress authorized massive peacetime mobilization. U.S. factories began converting to war production months before America even officially entered the war. Naval yards expanded. Aircraft plants multiplied. New assembly lines sprang up inside repurposed automobile plants. And America's industrial strategy wasn't just to meet demand, it was to overwhelm it. For German intelligence officers stationed in Latin America and neutral countries like Spain or Turkey, early signs were alarming. They sent reports back to Berlin. America was building factories at a rate never seen in human history. Detroit's automakers could switch from cars to tanks faster than German industry could retool. Shipyards were constructing vessel after vessel, faster than U-boats could sink them. These reports were dismissed as exaggerations by the Nazi high command. Yet, the truth was undeniable. By 1942, the United States was undergoing the largest industrial transformation ever attempted by a modern nation. The assembly lines ran 24 hours per day, every day. Women entered the workforce in unprecedented numbers. Skilled engineers from every corner of the country migrated to industrial centers. And the scale, impossible to ignore. America was producing 50,000 aircraft per year, 100,000 vehicles per month. Liberty ships launched in under 5 days. Ammunition measured not in tons, but in mountains. But numbers didn't break Nazi arrogance. Experience did. The moment of realization didn't come from intelligence reports. It didn't come from spies or intercepted communications. It came from German soldiers themselves. When the first waves of German prisoners of war arrived in the United States, they expected hardship. They expected a nation strained by war, suffering, rationing, and shortages. The same conditions Germans faced at home. What they found instead left them stunned into silence. Train rides across vast landscapes filled with factories, farms, and abundance. Towns lit up at night with electricity, something many German cities had already lost under Allied bombing. Entire rail networks dedicated solely to supply. Freight yards overflowing with tanks, trucks, and crates marked for Europe or the Pacific. Fields rich with food. Warehouses stacked with enough military supplies to equip multiple armies simultaneously. German POW diaries described disbelief. We had never seen such abundance. We traveled for days and never saw a land touched by war. Everything was new. Everything was working. For men who had been raised on the myth of American weakness, the experience was like stepping into an alternate reality. By the mid-1940s, every German soldier transported to the United States became a witness to a truth their leadership had denied. America wasn't merely capable of fighting a war. America was capable of fighting multiple wars simultaneously and winning them through production alone. The moment of realization wasn't a loud one. There were no explosions, no battles, no dramatic confrontations. Instead, it was a quiet, overwhelming recognition. The United States could replace every tank Germany destroyed. The United States could replace every airplane shot down. The United States could replace every ship sunk, and it could do it faster than Germany could report the loss. This wasn't just industrial power. It was industrial supremacy, and on that day, the day the Nazis finally understood the true scale of American production, they realized something terrifying. They were fighting a nation with resources so vast, so organized, and so relentless that victory had become mathematically impossible. By the start of 1943, reports from German military attachés were reaching Berlin with an edge of panic. These were not junior officers prone to exaggeration, but seasoned analysts who understood industrial output, logistical models, and wartime economics. They warned, America's aircraft production alone would soon exceed the combined totals of Germany, Italy, and Japan. U.S. shipyards were completing Liberty ships faster than German U-boats could sink them. The conversion of civilian factories into war plants was happening with unprecedented efficiency. The numbers were not estimates, they were verifiable. But in Berlin, the reaction was disbelief mixed with arrogance. If America can build so much, one Luftwaffe officer confidently said, let them. They cannot get it to the battlefield. He believed German submarines would starve the Atlantic of Allied supplies. He believed the U-boat arm would strangle America before its factories reached full productivity. But mathematics does not bend to belief. By mid-1943, Allied shipping lanes looked like a conveyor belt of steel. Convoys stretched for miles. Escort carriers patrolled relentlessly. Destroyers hunted U-boats with sonar-guided precision. New radar sets and improved HF/DF, Huff-Duff, direction-finding crippled German submarine tactics. And behind it all? American industry. Every time a U-boat scored a hit, 2 more Liberty ships were already sliding down launching rails somewhere on the East Coast. Every explosion at sea was immediately compensated inland. German Admiral Karl Dönitz, architect of the U-boat fleet, began seeing his worst nightmare unfold. He had calculated that sinking 300,000 tons of Allied shipping per month would force Britain to its knees. But America was replacing losses at twice that speed. The industrial machine kept roaring. For every ship sunk, another was already on the way. For every tanker destroyed, another convoy had already departed. For every submarine success, destroyers hunted with growing accuracy. Soon the U-boats were no longer hunters. They were prey. Inside a dim room at the Oberkommando der Wehrmacht, OKW, senior Nazi planners finally confronted American production statistics compiled by analysts. Charts showed the U.S. monthly aircraft output was 8,000 units. German aircraft output barely reached 1,000. American tank production dwarfed German totals 5-1. Ammunition shipments were measured in millions of tons. Officers argued, shouted, accused each other of exaggeration. The Reich was not used to losing arguments, only to dictating them. But the evidence was overwhelming. One frustrated general slammed his fist into the table and shouted, "This is madness. These numbers are impossible." The room fell silent. Another officer quietly answered, "Impossible for us." Not for them. It was the first admission that the Reich might be outmatched not tactically, but mathematically, a far deadlier reality. To America, war became a nationwide industry. Detroit, once the center of automobile innovation, became the beating heart of Allied production. Ford's Willow Run plant was building B-24 Liberator bombers on an assembly line, the first in air history. The plant was so massive that workers rode bicycles inside to move from station to station. Henry Ford promised 1 bomber per hour. Engineers laughed. Managers said it couldn't be done. A plane was too complex, too large, too fragile for assembly line mass production, but Willow Run achieved the impossible. Finished B-24s rolled off the line at record speed. Women riveters became icons of national resolve. Around-the-clock shifts turned Detroit into a 24-hour production blaze. Meanwhile, Chrysler turned automobile shops into tank factories. General Motors supplied engines, transmissions, and military vehicles by the thousands. American assembly lines were not just efficient, they were revolutionary. Where German factories emphasized precision craftsmanship, the U.S. emphasized modularity and volume. Parts were interchangeable, processes were standardized. Any factory could take over production of another factory's parts with minimal delay. Germany crafted machines. America mass-produced them, and quantity created its own quality. German POWs transported through the United States became unwilling ambassadors of truth. Their letters, censored but still expressive, described an America untouched by war's destruction. They wrote home, "Factories everywhere, all working. We travel days and see nothing destroyed. Every town is lit, every station full of cargo." What shocked them was not luxury or wealth, but stability. Food was plentiful, civilians were calm, production was relentless. Even more terrifying, America's home front was not exhausted, it was energized. POWs described long trains filled with tanks and planes moving in every direction, endless hardware streams feeding the war effort. They described assembly lines staffed by thousands, women, immigrants, engineers, mechanics, all working with the rhythm of a nation united. This wasn't the America Nazi propaganda portrayed. This was an industrial titan, a nation capable of war without suffering the destruction that cripples most societies. POWs returned to Germany after the war, telling stories their friends couldn't believe but couldn't dismiss. A country that big, that rich, that organized, how could we win? By 1943-44, America accomplished something no nation in history had done before. It created a war machine so vast, so coordinated, and so productive that its output reshaped global strategy. Entire divisions were supplied with equipment faster than German logistics could move reinforcements. Every tank replaced instantly. Every aircraft rebuilt stronger. Every ship launched faster. It became clear, no matter how brilliantly German tactics were executed, they could not outpace American production. The tide of war did not turn because Germany was weak, but because America was relentlessly strong, and the true shock came when U.S. industrial might collided with German forces on the battlefield. That collision, industrial versus tactical strength, exploded onto the stage in the next chapter. By the summer of 1944, German frontline commanders began seeing the physical manifestation of America's industrial power, not in statistics, not in intelligence reports, but on the battlefield. They faced an enemy whose equipment was everywhere, whose supplies seemed endless, and whose ability to replace losses bordered on the supernatural. German infantry divisions, once the pinnacle of discipline and training, found themselves worn down, under-equipped, and increasingly outnumbered by fresh American units that arrived fully supplied, fully armed, and fully supported by countless machines. What unnerved German officers most was not that America had more, but that America never seemed to run out. Their attacks failed not because German soldiers lacked courage, but because the U.S. war machine operated like an unstoppable tide. Every German breakthrough was swallowed by sheer material advantage. Every tactical win was temporary, drowned under waves of American reinforcements, tanks, aircraft, and mechanized transport. And then came the hammer blow. After D-Day, the German command expected Allied momentum to stall. Normandy's hedgerows were natural defensive fortresses, tight, maze-like fields that neutralized Allied armor and favored defenders. German units fought ferociously, using every advantage terrain could offer. But within weeks, they noticed something terrifying. American forces were deploying endless fresh divisions, endless ammunition, endless artillery rounds, endless tanks, endless transport vehicles. To the Americans, the hedgerows were a temporary obstacle. To the Germans, they were the last chance to hold the line. German commanders began to whisper, "They will simply keep coming." And they did. Where a German division might receive a few replacement vehicles in a month, American armored groups rolled forward with hundreds of Shermans, supported by motorized infantry, tank destroyers, bulldozers, engineers, and heavy guns. The turning point came when German officers realized the Americans had mechanized not just their combat units, but their entire army. Germany still relied heavily on horses for transport. America relied on horsepower, fuel, wheels, and engines. The contrast was brutal. Fuel, the lifeblood of mechanized warfare. By late 1944, even as German units were scraping the bottoms of fuel drums, the Americans had created a fuel delivery system so efficient it rewired military logistics. Thousands of tanker trucks continuously supplied front lines through secure routes. Pipelines were rapidly laid across France. Fuel depots sprouted near battle lines like industrial forests. The German army, still dependent on limited fuel convoys, could not keep up. This disparity created a tactical nightmare. American tanks rolled relentlessly forward, their engines constantly fed. German tanks, superior in armor and firepower, often sat idle, waiting for fuel that never came. German tank commanders described the horror: Panzer units forced to abandon Tiger tanks simply because they had no fuel. Crews destroying their own machines to prevent capture. The frustration of watching American vehicles move freely, unrestricted by fuel shortages. It wasn't a battle of tanks anymore. It was a battle of logistics, and Germany was losing. On the ground, German officers were overwhelmed, but above them, things were even worse. American aircraft production had flooded the skies with fighters, bombers, and reconnaissance planes. The Luftwaffe, once the most feared air force in the world, was now crippled by fuel shortages, pilot losses, and the industrial dominance of the United States. German pilots flew fewer and fewer missions. Those who did took off knowing the skies belonged to the Allies. The P-47 Thunderbolt and P-51 Mustang patrolled relentlessly, escorting bombers, sweeping skies, attacking ground forces, destroying supply lines, strafing everything that moved. German infantry called them Jabos, short for Jagdbomber. These fighter bombers haunted the daylight hours with a kind of clinical brutality. The sound of their engines became synonymous with terror. A German memoir recalled, "We could scarcely move a vehicle by day. The moment dust rose from a road, they were upon us." American air dominance wasn't just tactical, it was economic. For every aircraft Germany lost, America built 3. For every pilot killed, America trained another dozen. This replenishment cycle broke the Luftwaffe's spirit. Even the best pilots could not outfight mathematics. By late 1944, inside hardened bunkers near Berlin, the German high command pored over maps and frontline reports. Their worst fears were now undeniable. The Americans had more tanks, more trucks, more guns, more planes, more fuel, more ammunition, more manpower, more industry, more food. Everything pointed to one conclusion: Germany could win battles, but Germany could not win the war. Despite tactical brilliance, despite hardened veterans, despite superior individual weapon designs, they could not match an opponent whose industrial output dwarfed the combined Axis economies. Hitler refused to acknowledge this. He demanded counterattacks, reinforcements, miracles. But miracles don't overcome assembly lines. German generals, many privately, admitted defeat long before Hitler did. Not because their soldiers lacked courage, not because their officers lacked skill, but because America's industrial power had turned the war into a contest Germany could no longer compete in. German troops saw their supply lines collapse. Artillery crews received fewer shells. Tank battalions sat idle with empty fuel tanks. Infantry divisions lacked medical supplies, radios, and replacement equipment. Meanwhile, American units moved with mechanical precision, constant communication, fully stocked depots, medical teams, endless ammunition, reliable transport. The contrast was stark. German soldiers realized they were fighting a modern industrial army with a force that still relied on methods from the previous war. And the final blow was psychological. Veterans who had fought since 1939, men who once believed in the invincibility of the Wehrmacht, began whispering among themselves, "This war is lost." They did not lose heart. They lost hope. And once hope collapsed, defeat became inevitable.